Hey, what's up guys? So it's another beautiful day up here in the canyons as usual, and I've got Nick here, and this is his 1991 Toyota MR2 Turbo. So Nick, talk me through the car.
Okay, I got the car about 7 years ago. It was a midlife crisis purchase. It's kind of a boy racer kind of thing. It's been lowered on TRD springs. I was able to find some other TRD parts, sway bars, and it's on Coney yellows. I did some work on the interior, replaced the seats, the steering wheel, the shifts around, kind of cleaned it up a little bit. The previous owner had tracked the car a bit, and so he had gone through the engine, thankfully, and replaced the turbo. It's got a CT20B turbo from a Gen 3 on it, and a KO Racing downpipe. Did a Gritty SP muffler on it. I also put on a catch can and a K&N air filter. That's the air filter makes it a little bit more noisy. A little bit more boy racer, I guess.
Yep.
And that's about it that I can think of right now.
So mostly you've got some bolt-on basics mods, suspension mods. You've got the Coney yellow
Coney yellows
shocks, which are a great shock.
I upgraded the brakes to the 93 brakes.
Okay. So dual piston front calipers and single piston rear, right?
Right, but a larger rotor.
Larger rotors, okay.
The original.
And so with the turbo swap that the previous owner did, so the CT26 turbo that originally came with the 91 MR2 Turbo, that produced around, I think, 10 PSI or so from the factory. But then the one that you put in from the Gen 3 version of this 3S GTE engine produces more like 13 or 14 PSI from the factory.
Well, that's mainly because I have the manual boost controller in there
Okay.
to override the stock configuration.
So you've set it to 14 PSI?
Yeah, 13, 14. The main difference between the CT20B and the CT26 is the CT20B is a little bit smaller, so you would think it wouldn't flow as well, but they redid the housing. So the smaller turbo gives it a faster spool up, but yet it didn't lose any volumetric efficiency.
TRD bit here.
Yeah, these cross braces are really hard to come by now. I got one of the last ones that was on the open market.
Okay.
The previous owner had also upgraded the intercooler to a larger side mount air-to-air. It's still right down there.
There, okay.
Can't
really see it right now.
The stock one is really small and heat soaks pretty easily.
Is the stock one a top-mounted one?
No, there was a top mount air-to-water intercooler that was available on the four-wheel drive Celicas.
Oh, okay.
But
this was always
these were always air-to-air.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, it looks like a very, very clean MR2 Turbo. So power-wise, around 200 to the wheels or so?
Yeah, around 200 to the wheels.
So probably 230, 240 at the crank. Curb weight, since it is the targa top model, is a little bit higher, so probably like 2,900 pounds or so.
Yeah, I'd say that's right.
But the power-to-weight ratio is actually very close to my old Honda S2000. So that's definitely one car that I'd be looking to compare this to. So let's go take it for a drive.
Okay.
Okay, so first off, in terms of the driving position, it's time and time again, every time I drive a mid-engine rear-wheel drive car, those cars always tend to have really good driving positions. You sit very low, just like the Mark 1 MR2 and just like my NSX. You've got really great front visibility. The rear visibility is not bad as well, but obviously having that wing there does block your view a little bit, but it's not too bad. Driver controls all fell to hand very nice. The shifter's extremely light. It's a little bit notchy for my liking. And Nick, I think he said that you did put in some aftermarket bushings and a TRD short throw kit.
Right.
So it does actually improve the feel a little bit, but it's still notchier compared to like some of the Hondas I've driven, for example. Steering is pretty good. It is pretty light because it is a hydraulically assisted rack. It doesn't have quite as much feedback, I would say, as the Mark 1 MR2 that I recently drove, but it still feels pretty good. The steering ratio is quick enough to where you don't have to crank the pedal layout, it's not bad, but I think the clutch feels like it's a little bit closer to me than the brake and the throttle. And it does have a bit of a longer throw to it. So I have to be wary of that when I'm doing heel toe downshifting. And these seats are the Recaro M?
The speed with the M bottoms on
Speed,
them.
okay. So these seats they hold me in really well. I think they're the perfect size for just my torso. The one thing is, since the side bolsters are so aggressive, sometimes when I'm turning the wheel, keeping my hands at the 9 and 3 grooves here, my elbows do kind of hit the bolsters, but that's also because I kind of sit closer to the wheel since I'm not that tall. I'm sure for you it's probably not an issue with your arms more extended out.
I haven't really noticed it.
So like I said before, I really do want to try to compare the way this car performs and handles against the 2004 Honda S2000 I used to own, as well as the Mark 1 MR2 that I drove. That was a naturally aspirated model, so obviously has about half of the power at most of this car, while being maybe like 500 pounds or so lighter. So obviously the straightaway acceleration is going to be a huge difference with this turbo engine, but I would like to really compare the handling of the two, since this car obviously is heavier. So with these TRD lowering springs and the Kona yellow shocks, the ride has definitely firmed up quite a bit. Just personally, I probably wouldn't want to daily drive this car. Similar to my old S2000 with the Bilstein coilovers, it doesn't ride all that smooth over cracks in the pavement or little bumps and speed bumps. On smooth roads, like when I was driving it earlier on the freeway, it was totally fine, but still probably not a car I would want to drive in traffic every day.
They're adjustable shocks. Right now they're up at about 2/3 to the max.
Okay, of stiffness?
Yeah.
Okay.
They could be loosened up a bit.
Got it. So this first gen MR2 Turbo made about 200 horsepower and 200 torque at the crank from the factory. This one's making a bit more, around 230, 240 horsepower. Torque probably like 220 or so foot-pounds, I would guess.
I think it's right around 200.
200? Okay. So pretty good power to weight ratio. It's not too far off from being 10 pounds of curb weight per horsepower, which in my opinion, that's kind of the ideal power to weight ratio for a lighter car that you want to, be able to use the power on the streets or on the track without having to always be too mindful of keeping your right foot not, buried to the floor. Okay, so let's see how this thing does. The only really heavily turbocharged car I've driven before is a WRX, so I'll see if this feels similar to that. most modern turbocharged four cylinders, you get a lot of low end and medium range torque, but this is more of an old school turbo, so you get almost no power until about 3,000 RPM. Then you start to hear the whoosh of that turbo spinning, and then it really just kind of has a dual personality to it. Like below 3,000, it feels like you got like 80 horsepower, but then once you're up in the 4 to 5 to 6,000 RPM range, you really feel like you're getting that full 230 to 240 horsepower, and it keeps building all the way to redline. So I really like that aspect about it. I'm not a big fan of turbo cars where the power band dies off near the top, because I like to rev my cars all the way out to redline. That's why the redline's there. I don't want to have to short shift it, and so I really like the power delivery of this car. I will say that since it is turbocharged, it's not quite as adjustable in terms of the throttle response. When you modulate the throttle pedal a little bit, it does have a bit of a delay when you get off the throttle. I feel like the RPMs tend to hang just a little bit longer than you would in a naturally aspirated car, so you don't get quite as much engine braking. I want to say, but that's a trade-off that you get when you get a heavily turbocharged car. But in terms of the handling, the steering again, even at higher speeds, it still feels very light, and I prefer how the steering feels at higher speeds than at lower speeds. At lower speeds, it feels a little bit light and not incredibly all that, doesn't have all that much feedback. But at higher speeds, that becomes kind of an advantage because it's still light and it's adjustable, and you don't find yourself having to really muscle your way through the corners.
From what I understand, the power steering unit, which is electrically driven, the pump is electrical in the front, it pretty much cuts off after 20 miles per hour.
Oh, okay, so you're pretty much experiencing full manual steering above 20.
Right.
Okay. So I will say that compared to the first gen MR2, compared to the Miata and other cars that weigh, under 2,400 pounds, this car definitely feels heavier. And, the curb weight gives that away. I mean, it weighs close to 2,900 pounds. It's not exactly a super light car. It's still light by today's standards, but if you look at the BRZ, the Subaru BRZ Scion FRS, that car weighs a little over 2,700 pounds. And that's considered light by today's standards. So this one is a little bit on the heavier side. It has enough power to still feel quick on the straights, despite the weight. But then when you enter a corner, it does feel a little bit more labored compared to the earlier, lighter cars. And that's not to say it doesn't have grip. It has plenty of grip. I think the tires on this are 225 front section, 235 rears.
So I think I'm running 205s in the front.
205s in the front.
Either
Okay.
205s or 215s.
And they're
235s in the rear.
okay. And they're pretty good tires, right? They're summer tires.
They're Michelin pilots.
Okay. So pretty good street tires. So the car still has plenty of grip. It's just I feel that the initial turn-in is not bad, but it's just not quite as tossable, in my opinion, as the first gen MR2 or the Miata. Even the S2000 feels lighter than this car, but at the same time, you get great traction in this car exiting the corners due to its slight rear weight bias. You can really get on the power a bit earlier and just have the turbo just rocket you forward, which I really like.
I love the drama of the turbo.
Yeah, and the sound it makes is just awesome. It's really cool. It's not something that you get out of a naturally aspirated car in just terms of the drama of it and the way it delivers power. And I think the suspension mods, although they might not be the best for daily driving, at least at the current setting you have them at, out here in the canyons, it feels really good when you start pushing the car faster. There's very minimal body roll. Do you have sway bars on this car?
Yeah, it's got some TRD sway bars.
Okay, front and rear?
Front and rear, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, there's very minimal body roll in the corners, and it feels very planted. I didn't really, get anywhere near to the point of where I can exploit the actual the mechanical grip of the car. I didn't get a hint of tire squeal or anything. So the thing with MR2s that everyone complains about is when you do push it to the very limit, it does tend to snap oversteer, meaning if you let off the throttle a little bit mid-corner too aggressively, then the rear will tend to come out, and it's harder to catch compared to something with a front engine rear drive layout. Since the rear is heavier here, once it swings out, you really have to be quick to react to that and counter steer. Obviously, I'm not going S2000, power to weight, the acceleration is similar, but the way the way it delivers it is a lot more dramatic. And obviously, in terms of performance, there's no comparison between this and the first gen naturally aspirated or even the supercharged Mark 1 MR2 is still going to be, a completely different world of performance. And I forgot to mention earlier, the braking feel is pretty good too. The pedal feels very solid, and it requires a little bit more effort to push the pedal than my S2000 did, at least. It feels more similar to my NSX. Maybe that's just, older brakes require more pressure, I don't know. But it stops the car just fine. You just have to be a little bit more forceful with it. Heel toe downshifting overall is easy because of the pedal layout, it's fine. The transmission's pretty forgiving, but due to the fact that, I mentioned earlier that there is a little bit of throttle delay when you blip the throttle, there's not an instantaneous response the way that I get with a naturally aspirated engine. So I find myself having to blip the throttle a little bit harder and waiting a little bit longer before I let the clutch back out. Otherwise, the engine revs won't go up quite as much as I need it to, and it'll kind of bog the car a little bit. But that's just something you have to get used to with your driving style. It's not, a downside to the car by any means.
At the time, I wanted to get a car that was reasonably modern. I have a 1964 MGB, which isn't something that's suitable for driving to work, especially since I drive over Highway 17. It's a pretty dangerous road for a car like that. So I wanted a more modern car, and I was looking at maybe a 300Z and RX-7.
Yep, the early 90s, all the Japanese sports cars.
And then I thought, well, Toyota makes the MR2, and at the time I had one of Toyota's other mid-engine cars, which was a Previa van.
Oh yeah.
Which is, I think, all around one of my favorite cars.
Rear-wheel drive too, right?
Rear-wheel drive, mid-engine, very planted, tons of space inside. It's a great car.
Yeah.
And so that just led me to looking at MR2s, and I looked quite a while. I saw this one up in Seattle on Craigslist.
Okay.
And I wasn't really planning on going that far for a car, but it was yellow. My dad always had yellow sports cars growing up, so I just had to do it.
Yeah, I think you made a great choice. What do you think the market price for decent mechanical condition 91 MR2 turbos are nowadays?
I think if you look around, you'll be able to get one for around
Around 7,000?
Yeah. If they're priced higher than that, they just don't sell.
I think part of it is I think Toyota produced a lot of these cars, so they're not exactly the most rare thing on the road, but at the same time, finding a nice clean turbo like this that hasn't been just completely riced out, so to speak, is not that common. It's not that easy to do. So I don't know. I think this might be one of the cars that you could possibly look at them becoming even more rare and appreciating, possibly, or at least holding their value very well in the next 10-20 years at least, I think.
Yeah, I think that for a decent sports car, $7,000 is
I mean, that's pocket change for something with over 200 horsepower, right?
Yeah, the bang for the buck is pretty huge.
Yeah. So, and it really puts it into perspective when you think about the fact that the S2000, for a comparably clean, low mileage one, you would have to pay more like 12 to 14 grand. And in terms of handling, I still prefer the S2000. It feels more nimble. It feels lighter than 2,800 pounds, even though it weighs that much. But in terms of all-out performance, on the street at least, this car is right up there with it, if not a little bit quicker on the streets. And yet it costs probably a good $5,000 less to get a clean one. So I think, bang for your buck, it's a great car if it's within your budget of $10,000 or so, and you want a fun car that's light but also fast in a straight line. I think it's a great choice. And so this particular car has 147, almost 148,000 miles on it, and I assume it's the original engine, right?
Yep.
Okay. Have you had any reliability issues with it in the last 6 years of ownership?
None.
terms of like changing the brake pads, you know, it's probably just as easy as any other car from that era. But if you want to do actual engine work, you know, obviously having the engine behind you makes it harder to reach. Probably, you know, the spark plugs, or if you want to drop the engine out, do a timing belt change or what have you, it's not going to be as easy as a front engine car. But that's just the trade-off that you get, you know, for having this MR layout. So in conclusion, I love this car. I would say for street use and for canyon use, it's, you know, a 9 out of 10 probably for me. For track use, you know, I don't have any experience with this car on the track, so I can't really comment, but based on what I've heard from, you know, other sources online, it's probably not the easiest car to drive on the track and would require a higher level of skill for sure. But for street use, it's great. And I would say if you've got a budget of 10K or so, and you don't want to just get a really nice Miata or another lower power car, and you want something that's quicker and, you know, looks more modern, more exotic, I think the MR2 Turbo is, I mean, off the top of my head, I don't think I'd rather have any car right now for 10K than an MR2 Turbo if I was looking for something purely for the street.
T-tops.
Yeah, and T-tops are great. For the track, I would get an S2000 hands down, but that's a very more specialized kind of use case that not everyone's going to do. So thanks again, Nick, for letting me drive your car. Really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.
So the next car I hopefully will be driving is a twin-charge Mark 1 MR2, and that's going to be really fun. Don't want to give away too much about that car besides the fact that it's twin-charge, but look forward to that video in the next few weeks. If you like my video, please subscribe, leave comments, suggestions. I'm open to all feedback, and I'll see you guys next time.